after last week's fun and games of trying to get the manual V12 coupe to run properly, hopefully this week we can get back to making cars. And the bit I want to do next is the area of building this car that I've wanted to do since day one. And that is to build the interior. But before we get on with that, we need to take some inspiration from other designs to decide the way that we want this to look. Now obviously, this is a very retro-inspired car, so we're not going down the carbon fibre route. I'm also a big fan of leather and wood interiors, so I think we need plenty of that. I also like some of the exposed details you see in this spiker, so I think we should have a look at doing that too. Sadly though, the reality of where we're starting from looks a bit like this. Yeah, well, all great projects have to start somewhere. Now, having hopefully learnt my lesson from the exploding bottom incident, I first decided to disconnect the battery. I did of course realise that with the back of the car opened and the battery disconnected, I could of course no longer shut it. But I guess it didn't really matter, it can stay open for the duration of this part of the project. I also thought it would be a good idea to completely decompress the air suspension, as all the control pipes live right under the dashboard, and the last thing in the world I wanted was one of them coming undone and to have the suspension suddenly crash to the ground. The next thing to do was remove the steering column, as I've never been completely convinced it's in the right place. And with that out of the way, I could then put the seats in that I've got for the car just to see how they look. I could also take this opportunity to sit in the car itself, hold the steering wheel to roughly where I felt it should go, just to see whether the driving position was right. And of course, any rumours that I may or may not have been making brum brum noises whilst doing this are, of course, completely unfounded. With that out of the way, I could then weld on a couple of brackets to allow me to help position the lower half of the dashboard. These only needed to be rough at this stage and were really there just to allow me to clamp things in so I could stand back, look at them and decide whether the design looked right. A few years ago at an auto jumble, I saw one of these, and that is a heater control from an old Jaguar S-Type. Now I thought it looked pretty cool, so I've decided to make this a feature of the lower part of the dashboard itself. Mine isn't in quite this good a condition and will need a little bit of restoration, but it will do for now. And the first thing to do was to mount a bracket to the back of it that would allow me to bolt it to those two other brackets I've welded on earlier. So that looked roughly right, so it was then on with the process of making it look properly right. I also, while recording this sequence, broke out my brand new welding mask, and oh my god, I hadn't realised how dirty my old one was and how little I can see. It's like a complete revelation getting this new one. I highly recommend to everybody watching this that does welding, get a new mask. Now you may have noticed that this centrepiece has D-shaped ends, and therefore I needed to make some D-shaped bits. So to do this, I found some appropriate 20mm diameter steel tube and welded on a small section of that either side, and then filled in the flatter part of it with some 20mm bar stock that I cut down to shape. So there you go. It's all a bit loosely tacked together, but I quite like the look of it and it's coming together quite well. So that I think will do for the lower part of the dashboard at this stage. So with a solid reference point for the bottom of the dashboard, I could then turn my attention to the center console. And what I'm trying to do with this interior is to avoid a problem that's very common with hand-built or limited production run cars, and that is interiors that fall apart. This flimsiness is often because of the plastic clips used to try and hold trim together such that you don't have visible screws. But with this car, I'm going down more the route that Pagani uses, which is to make a feature of the visible screws. And if Mr. Pagani can get away with it, I think I can get away with it too. However, one thing I am going to have to be very careful about is that where I stick leather or leather cloth down, that it doesn't just immediately peel off. And the way to do this is to make sure that each panel that's bolted down actually clamps the back of the leather cloth to the back of the panel so it can't peel off. Anyway, what that means for the car is that I cut out 2 long strips of metal that I can bolt to either side of the transmission tunnel. I'm going to weld on a couple of tubes on top of that to give it a nice curved surface, and from that I'll then somewhere down the line make an infill panel where we'll mount things like the handbrake and the gear change mechanism. Oh, and yeah, a couple of cup holders too. I hate cars without cup holders.